I am joined, as I am each month, by attorney and government expert Chris Hand to discuss the political news of the day. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Ann. How are you?
Great. Did you have a nice long weekend?
I did. I hope you did as well.
I did, and glad to be back in the saddle here. I want to start, if we can, by this budget impasse, which continues to this day. The lawmakers deciding not going to return this week. Um, Remind us, first of all, about the obligation the legislature has. They kind of have one job.
This is like that meme, Ann, where you had one job. Well, under the Florida Constitution, the legislature truly has one job, not that they don't do others, during each year's legislative session. That is to pass a budget which has to be in place by June 30th before the start of the next fiscal year on July 1. Now, in the recent history of the state of Florida, we have not had a government shutdown where there was not a budget in place, a balanced budget in place by June the 30th. This year, I think the state is flirting with that more than it ever has before. As you say, right before Memorial Day, the president of the Senate put out a memo saying that the Senate would not come back this week. Right now, the current legislative session is extended on the House side through June 30th, on the Senate side through June the 6th.
Mm.
So there's not even agreement on kind of how long the current session will go. Never mind any agreement on sort of a budget framework or what the particulars of that budget might be. And again, the clock is ticking. And as you know, we're not just dealing with two parties here, we're dealing with three parties here. Obviously, the Florida House of Representatives, led by Danny Perez, who's the Speaker, the Florida Senate, led by Ben Albritton, who's the Senate President, and of course, the governor, Ron DeSantis. There was an earlier sort of framework agreement that fell apart because the governor said, "Well, if that's the budget you pass, I'm gonna be exercising my veto authority."
And
So
none of those parties Democrats, all just different kind of competing Republican interests.
correct, and I think it sort of shows the sort of time-honored practice in Tallahassee. When you get into the budget negotiations, it doesn't really matter the letter that's after your last name on the ballot. There can be equally contentious relationships among a particular party as between parties, and we're certainly seeing that this year in the budget process.
And in your experience, Chris, I mean, have you seen a budget that's gotten this contentious? I mean, certainly there have been times, I guess, where they haven't made it within the session deadline, but perhaps have made it earlier than the 30th, which seems like that really is flirting with a very um, difficult deadline. I mean, if they were to go with what the House has set, if the Senate agrees, that's very close to the actual shutdown deadline.
It is. There was a budget during Rick Scott's first term that went into, I believe, went into June before it was ultimately passed. But certainly, this is the first one in a while where we've kind of come this close. Typically, even if they have to go a little bit longer, the House and the Senate usually find, sort of some place to kind of accommodate each other and their different priorities in this process. What's interesting now is I think we're beginning to enter into a period. We're certainly seeing it at local government and state governments around the country where revenue's beginning to be more tight. That generally leads to tougher budget discussions, maybe harder to reach agreement, and some real philosophical differences. I mean, the governor has been kind of urging the state to either eliminate or at least sharply reduce property taxes. The state house speaker, Danny Perez, has a very different idea what he wants to do. He wants to cut the state sales tax from six for the foundation sales tax from 6% to 5.25%. And the Senate president, is sort of trying to kind of accommodate and figure out where there comes consensus can be found there. So I think, we've got addition to sort of revenue starting to shrink a little bit at the state level. You've got some very different philosophical ideas and some political differences. Obviously, the legislature in this session, more than it has during any point in Ron DeSantis' term, has really asserted itself as a co-equal branch of government. So you take all those forces, you combine them together, and that's where we find ourselves from a budget standpoint.
They were before the session ended, it seemed like they had sort of a framework as they described it, and then that fell apart. Is that because the governor was threatening to veto, this kind of idea that they had sort of loosely agreed upon?
That's right. The sort of basic idea they had agreed on, again, originally Speaker Perez proposed a, three-quarter point cut in the state foundation sales tax. Obviously, there's some local option sales taxes as well, from 6% to 5.25%. There was, basic agreement on a tax reduction that would have lowered the sales tax permanently by 0.25, so from 6 to 5.75. That fell apart when the governor said, "I'm going to veto that. I'm anything that has a sales tax cut. I'm going to veto it because my focus is on cutting property taxes. So it really was the governor's intervention there. That's why I mentioned the three parties because it was really his intervention, I think, that caused that framework to go away.
Now, we know that in the past, the governor has been liberal with his use of the veto pen. Does a session this contentious, a budget session that's been this difficult, suggest that he will use that more when and if and when they pass a budget?
I'm anticipating a record number of gubernatorial vetoes this year, largely because of the sort of the contentious nature of the session. I think it would not be surprising if we particularly see those fall on House member projects, just given the particular relationship between the Speaker of the House and the governor in this particular session. We won't know that until obviously we've gotten to the budget point. But one thing that could stay the governor's veto pen a little bit is the fact that the House and the Senate have shown some willingness now to override the governor's budget vetoes. You know, one of the first things they did this year was override some spending vetoes that he made in the 2024. They have shown a willingness to do that. So that may temper a little bit how that works. Or we could go into a situation where the governor vetoes even more and the House and Senate come back and try to override that. So I think this is definitely going to be one of those situations where it's not going to be over even when it's over.
If you're just joining us, we are talking, as we do each month, with attorney and government expert Chris Hand about state and local headlines. And if you'd like to join our conversation, please give us a call at 904 549 2937 or email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Of course, you can also reach out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, or X at FCC On Air. Chris, at what point does political gamesmanship like this actually have an impact of any kind or do any kind of damage to ordinary residents of Florida?
Well, as you can imagine, there are any number of whether it's organizations or nonprofits or individuals who are waiting to see what the final budget is going to look like. The state, appropriates a lot of money that goes to a lot of different, whether that's people who are businesses who are, awaiting state money in some way, whether those are nonprofits. You know, we saw this last year with arts and cultural organizations. And right now, all of those individuals, and for that matter, the levers of state government, since this sort of fund, the budget obviously funds state government agencies as well, and all of the different individuals and entities who are, reliant or waiting on those state government agencies. So everyone is sort of frozen right now, waiting to kind of see where this particular budget might go. So the delay creates uncertainty that really travels downhill very fast and affects a lot of people in the state right now. Now, of course, once a budget is passed and the governor exercises his veto, and we know what the budget looks like, we'll know what those impacts are. But that could be another month at this point before we get there, if not even more than that, right? I mean, they could pass the budget on time, have it in place, have the governor issue vetoes, and then have the legislature come back and at that point try to override those vetoes. So again, the longer this goes, the more uncertainty it creates for anybody who has a relationship with the Florida budget.
We've got a call from Daryl in St. Augustine. Good morning, Daryl. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. Chris, I'd like your thoughts on the Florida free kill bill. Um,
Daryl, if you're there, I think we lost the tail end of your question. But Daryl, of course, has been very active on this issue. He lost a son last year and has been lobbying very strenuously for the abolition of the so called free kill law. What are your thoughts?
First of all, Daryl, thanks for your call, and of course, many condolences on your loss. As Daryl knows, and many of our viewers know, this was a bill sponsored by State Senator Clay Yarborough from Jacksonville, which would remove an exemption in Florida's kind of medical malpractice liability law as it related to compensation for, medical malpractice victims of a certain age who, were not allowed to collect under Florida law. We are now kind of waiting to see exactly what's going to happen. The governor has signaled that he is not going to sign that law, that he's going to veto it. He used some very provocative language in saying that, sort of comparing, folks who were awarded judgments for medical negligence in these situations to winning the lottery, which were quite sort of controversial in that situation and received a lot of public attention.
Because,
There's
of course, those are people who've lost family members who don't qualify for any kind of, payment in those cases.
Correct. Yeah. So very controversial comments the governor made on that. I don't believe the bill has actually been vetoed yet. He has said, because I'm not sure the legislature's actually sent it over, but he has indicated he is going to veto it. That will be one certainly to watch if the governor does veto it, to see if the legislature tries to step in and take further action at that point. It passed overwhelmingly in the legislature this year. This wasn't one that was a kind of a vote that was on a razor's edge. It was very overwhelming support from the Florida legislature. So, again, another area of contention between the legislature and the governor.
And Daryl, I don't know if we have you back. Did you have any follow up for Chris?
Yes. Yeah, no, I mean, do you think that they would override his veto?
I think that would
Are
be an
you there?
excellent. I think that would be an excellent question for Senator Yarborough and others to sort of see what sort of support exists in the legislature to do something like that. I'll tell you, it is when you see that sort of broad legislative support, that is not often when you see such a quick gubernatorial veto threat in those situations. I mean, that sort of broad-based consensus support. I mean, like look for example, and obviously a very different issue, but the legislature again with same kind of very broad support passed the bill prohibiting hotels and pickleball courts and things like that in state parks. Even though it was the governor's administration who had proposed that idea, he then signed that bill,
Quickly.
pretty quickly to kind of help move it along. This is again a situation where there was broad legislative support, so it may well be something the legislature wants to revisit. But again, and I know Daryl already knows this, but other callers who are interested in this, all the more reason to reach out to your state legislators and make sure that if you are someone who is supportive of wanting to have, if the governor does veto it, wanting to have the legislature try and move it back in the direction of becoming law, reach out to your legislators, make sure you communicate with them, make sure they know where you stand on this issue.
I want to ask you a little bit, Chris, to dig into this issue of tax cuts, because you mentioned it as one of the stumbling blocks that is, preventing a budget from happening. But basically, there are two ideas that the legislature is thinking of. One would be to reduce property taxes or perhaps to get rid of them altogether, which is what the governor has said he wanted. The other is to reduce sales taxes. But there has been some analysis about, who would be most impacted by that. What does the analysis show?
Well, a lot of the analysis, Ann, has been around the issue of property taxes because of the disproportionate impact that would have on local governments, city and county governments. Just to sort of put this, and just to kind of frame up for everyone, the only way the property tax can be abolished in the state of Florida is through a constitutional amendment. So that would have to be put on the ballot. 60% plus one of the voters would have to approve because we have a supermajority standard in constitutional amendment for constitutional amendments in Florida. They'd have to approve that abolition for that to become law. So that's not something the governor can do unilaterally or the legislature can do with just a simple sort of majority vote. It has to go to the voters to be approved.
And the soonest that could happen would be 2026. Is that right?
Correct,
Okay.
November 2026. That's what the governor sort of signaled is what he wants to do is put that potential amendment on the ballot November 2026, which would be right before he leaves office. Florida will also be electing a new governor in that election. What we have seen and what you see in places around the state is that this would have a disproportionate effect on local governments, both city governments, county governments, and school districts, all of which heavily rely on property taxes, which are also known as ad valorem taxes. Just to put this in some perspective, last year the city of Jacksonville's budget was about $1.8 billion. $1.03 billion of that budget was from property taxes. So
Wow.
that's more than half of the city of Jacksonville budget. The source was property taxes. Other cities and counties, not quite that much, but still have significant amounts of property tax money coming in. Here's what the property tax funds. It funds police. It funds fire. It funds public fire, fire and rescue. It funds public works. It funds parks. All of those core local government services. There's a variety of things local government does, and people agree or disagree about, whether they support that. But there are always those core services that local government provides. And I think that's why you've seen a very broad coalition of kind of leaders and thinkers around the state express concern. People ranging from the Florida Policy Council, which has done some studies of this and which has sort of suggested not only will this have a huge impact on local government services if it were to go away, but to make up the revenue, the state would probably, according to this Florida Policy Council analysis, would have to raise the sales tax from its current 6% level to 12%, doubling it, making it the biggest sales tax in the state. There have been others. State Representative
Or
Dean,
the biggest sales tax in the
excuse me, in the
nation.
nation. I'm
Yeah, yeah.
sorry. Yeah, our state would be the biggest sales tax in the nation. For example, State Representative Dean Black, who's a Republican member of the legislature from Jacksonville, has expressed concern at the potentially huge impact this could have on public safety operations. Because again, the way we largely fund law enforcement, first responders, is through property taxes. So you're hearing a lot of concern about what the elimination of the property tax could do. There are some other sort of fallback options the governor has recommended, whether that's giving sort of a rebate to Florida property tax owners. A lot of this comes out of the fact that obviously the Florida real estate market has been very hot for the last several years. Property values have gone up. That's obviously increased receipts into local and state governments. That is now beginning to come down. We're going to see that in the city of Jacksonville this year. There's probably going to be a fairly substantial deficit. The city has to close, and we're seeing it around the state as well. So it does work in both directions. But I think that's what's sort of been the impetus for what the governor's proposed. So far, he has not received much support from the legislature on this. As I said, the House has been focused on cutting the sales tax, not the property tax, and seems to have gotten a fairly lukewarm response from the Senate as well.
Is this a purely philosophical kind of legacy building effort or proposal by the governor? Or does he just believe that local governments are spending, profligately and not using those revenues wisely?
I don't know what his particular motivations are. It could be, I mean, again, there are some who have the philosophical belief that we shouldn't charge property taxes because, again, you own the home already, and you shouldn't have to pay to continue kind of owning your home in that regard. There has been concern about, again, with other affordability concerns we've had in Florida in recent years, that the because the property values have been higher, that's raised property taxes. Now, remember, we do have in this state the Save Our Homes Amendment in the Florida Constitution, which limits the amount that the assessment on our homes, the valuation of our homes, can increase each year for property tax purposes. It's capped at 3% a year. So there are some protections already built in there. So it could be philosophical. It could be the governor wants to make a significant statement before he leaves office. I don't know what his motivations are, but so far there has not been a hugely enthusiastic reaction from the legislature, which is crucial because a supermajority of the legislature would be required to put any property tax abolition amendment on the ballot. The Senate has talked about potentially commissioning a study to sort of see what the impacts would be before anything's put on the ballot. The House, again, has kind of gone all in on the idea of a sales tax cut as opposed to a property tax cut.
So there is this committee that I guess is going to be looking at this. The governor said that because there's so many members, I think there's 37 members, that's an effort to smother this in the crib, I think is the phrase that he used. But I'm curious, I mean, taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, whichever, pay for things. Insurance rates are, this other area that have really impacted homeowners, Florida residents, as they've continued to skyrocket. Why is it that the legislature is tackling property tax increases and doing nothing on insurance rate increases?
Well, it is very interesting because you go to some other parts of the country. I was up in the Northeast this weekend, and in there and in parts of the Midwest, you see actually the reverse situation where they're in a situation where their insurance rates are actually quite low, but their property taxes are very high. So, kind of relative to other states, Florida's property taxes, as you say, what has been the main cost driver in the state has been the cost of property insurance. The legislature has taken some action on this in recent years. As of now, we have not yet seen sort of a decline in rates kind of statewide. It continues to be an issue of affordability for Floridians. You continue to hear stories of people moving out of the state because of the cost burden of property insurance, or in some cases going uninsured altogether, which is problematic for other reasons. So you're right. It is interesting that the sort of the debate is about taxes and less about property insurance. I think what's going to be most interesting, Ann, is to what extent property insurance is an issue in the governor's race next year and in the statewide cabinet races, because, again, that really is, I think, the major cost driver in Florida right now. I think all the candidates are probably going to have to address that on the campaign trail.
We've got a call on this subject from Jason in San Marco. Good morning, Jason. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you. The idea of eliminating the property taxes is a really bad idea. And I think that if it's coming from Governor DeSantis, that's probably a good indication that it's a bad idea. This is a man who, according to my knowledge, doesn't even own a home. And I know they've talked about a lot of things, but they said, well, we'll waive it for people who are over 75. You're going to make this a state where no one will want to live. Pardon me if you do this. And the richest people in Florida are that enormous swath of people that are over 75. And this is a thing where if you go to Naples and Palm Beach, they love this idea. But if you look across the country, you will find that not one state of the 50 has eliminated property and real estate taxes. And I would say that's probably a good testing ground that it's not a very good idea. Thank you for taking my call.
Thanks, Jason. I mean, certainly, the question of money for schools, that's always been a divisive issue when you have a lot of retirees in Florida who aren't interested necessarily in paying for that. But this shift in, how things are funded could raise the idea of, additional fees, for instance, toll roads or park access fees, or other changes and move away from neighborhood parks to regional parks, the kind of reallocation that could happen if those revenue sources change dramatically.
That's certainly true. I think one of the challenges always, if Florida were to go through that sort of shift, and that it's very hard to ultimately, I think, reach that balance, right? How do you sort of balance that and find the right revenue sources? And look, I think part of the concern that some city and county governments and school districts have raised about the idea of eliminating the property tax, it's the state in that sense, kind of cutting taxes where state governments sort of cutting taxes where the local governments have to ultimately pay the bill of cutting those taxes. And that's sort of been a sort of a dominant theme between local government and state government over the last, decade or so, where state government has sort of preempted local government authority and power on a number of issues while also sort of cutting off some revenue sources that they can utilize or requiring state permission to use those revenue sources. So part of another sort of theme that's involved here is that sort of continued push and pull between the state government and city and county governments. And again, great concern. Groups like the Florida League of Cities, Florida Association of Counties, deeply concerned about this proposal because again, it goes right to those core services.
Well, sure. I mean, to your note about the actual amount of the budget that comes from ad valorem taxes, I mean, the city would be bankrupted if it lost, 1.03 of its 1.8, billion-dollar budget.
That's just simply not sustainable. There is no budget at that point.
We have a call from Lisa in Tallahassee. Good morning, Lisa. Go ahead.
Good morning. Well, I wanted to add on to the tail end of what y'all were just saying about, the word is escaping me, but the last 2 years, the pattern in the legislature has been taking power away from local municipalities and handing it to the state. And I, see DeSantis as kind of this vengeful, vindictive person in general, and that seems to be reflected in this, property tax issue. But the thing that I wanted to call about was the Hope Fund that's gone suddenly silent and is the elephant in the room. And I wondered if Mr. Hand might believe that that may be an issue in this delay on the budget because a lot of the legislators are afraid of retribution if they pursue going into this $10 million that was taken from the lawsuit and handed to Casey DeSantis for her charity fund that then got redirected. $10 million got redirected to these two kind of dark money funds that ended up going to fight the Citizens Initiative.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I mean, I guess we should correct a little bit. The money didn't go to Casey DeSantis. It went to Hope Florida, which, she was affiliated with creating.
Right. And just again, for everybody, so as a reminder as to how we got here, the state reached about a $67 million settlement with Centene, which is a Medicaid benefits provider, pharmacy benefit manager. What apparently has happened here is about $10 million of that settlement was sent to Hope Florida Foundation, which is, theoretically set up to provide, sort of charitable support around the state. Some of that money then ended up in the coffers of the campaign against medical marijuana, or excuse me, against recreational marijuana in 2024. That's been a continuing investigation, largely led at the legislative side on the state house, particularly a member of the Florida House named Alex Andrade from the Pensacola area has been largely pushing that. I would say it's now seeming to move into some different venues. Representative Andrade apparently made a criminal referral to the state attorney for the Second Judicial Circuit based in Tallahassee. According to media reports, that office has opened an investigation into Hope, Florida. Just this morning, the Florida Trident reported that there may be another sort of avenue that this goes down. Under the Florida Administrative Code, any settlement is supposed to be reviewed by the Florida Chief Financial Officer, the Department of Financial Services. This morning, the Florida Trident, which is out of the Center for Government Accountability at the University of Florida, reporting that that apparently did not happen with this settlement. Former CFO Jimmy Petronas, we actually don't have a CFO in place in Florida right now. Former CFO Jimmy Petronas, now member of Congress from the Panhandle, was asked, "Did you know anything about this?" And he said, I never heard of Hope, Florida before kind of it hit the news." So apparently that was also not sort of sent through the CFO's office, which, settlements typically are at the state level. So that's another angle. So I don't know that it's gone so much quiet as it has just sort of shifted to some other venues while that investigation continues on a number of fronts.
Lisa, I guess wondering though if lawmakers are kind of pulling their punches because they're concerned about retribution and the veto cycle. Um, your
Well, I
thoughts?
mean, not in the sense that again, it was a lawmaker who made the criminal referral to the state attorney's office. So there doesn't seem to be active legislative investigation right now. But that also might be because but for the budget, the session is pretty much over. What happens in a future session, we'll have to see. The legislature certainly has the power to continue to provide oversight and investigate this in the future as well. But I think the lack of legislative action is probably more about the fact that, again, there's that one job they have to do of passing the budget. They haven't done it yet. And that's really sort of the remaining focus of, whatever time they have left in session.
I do want to ask you, Chris, because I know that you have been doing some speaking about the city budget in here in Duval County, Jacksonville, and what we're looking at. It's something that you've you know uh, analyzed. You've got some expectations about how the city's revenue situation might fall. Can you just sort of update us on your thoughts about how that might develop?
Of course, and this is a trend we're seeing around the country, and as we were sort of referring to earlier, but revenues are declining for local governments all over the country. This isn't just the city of Jacksonville, but Jacksonville is going to be one of those local governments affected by it. Last summer, the City Council Auditor's Office did a projection. They anticipated a budget deficit of $80 million this year, $40 million next year, and then over $100 million for each of the 2 years after that. These are very difficult to close. I was in city government from 2011 to 2015 at a time where, after the Great Recession, revenues had sort of dried up. It is a very, very difficult and challenging process to close budget deficits of that size. So the city of Jacksonville is going to be dealing with that starting in this budget cycle. One thing I would encourage our listeners to do, Ann, is a budget is a statement of priorities. That's the city of Jacksonville at the end of each year when it has a budget that states what it wants to invest money in over the upcoming year. I think it's always important to remember the top of the city of Jacksonville organizational chart is not the city council, it's not the mayor, it's the citizenry. Very important that in now the sort of month and a half before the mayor proposes her budget to the council and council gets and receives and starts looking at that budget, that citizens weigh in and make sure that council members are clear, the mayor's office is clear what their priorities are for the budget, because this ultimately is the people's budget, the citizens' budget. So again, I would encourage anybody, and what I've been doing in some of the talks I've given is to say that you're at the top of the org chart. This is your budget. It's important you communicate your priorities to your district council person and the 5 at-large council people who also represent you, and to the mayor's office, so they know what your priorities are. Are the priorities to invest in public safety? Are they to make sure public works can build infrastructure projects? Is it to invest in parks? Might be all of the above. But now is a crucial time for citizens to weigh in with the mayor and with council members. Now, there's already been some opportunities to do that. The mayor's office, to its credit, had a series of budget workshops, town hall meetings. Mayor Payton did that when he was in office as well. I think it's something that every mayor's office should plan to do, and every council member ought to think about doing as well. But now, between now, really over the entire month of June as well, is really a crucial time for citizens to weigh in. What do you want in your budget?
We have an email from Stefan. He says, I think DeSantis is trying to eliminate the property tax just to get the attention of rich campaign donors for a future Senate or presidential campaign. Our country's campaign finance system is now so corrupt. The support of a single billionaire can fund a campaign. We also have a call from Lisa in St. Augustine. Good morning, Lisa. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'm calling with a suggestion of maybe thinking about a tax credit, which would be for the amount of insurance that we're paying to give some relief for the high insurance. In my own example, since I purchased my home and today my insurance has gone up 300%, and the same with my property tax from the time I purchased it, from the original owner and myself. I'm paying 300%, 3 times the amount. And if I could get a credit, perhaps it would really give me some relief and take some of the burden away, but still contributing something in property tax, which is absolutely necessary to fund those necessary things in our community.
Thanks, Lisa. I mean, a difficult perspective because, of course, we know that those things pay for things, but they are really hurting people, ordinary people.
Well, no question about it. And I think that's a very interesting idea, Lisa, and one I strongly encourage you to reach out to your elected representatives. I don't know exactly where you live in St. Augustine, but obviously you have a state representative, state senator. Make sure you talk to them as well as your St. Johns County commissioners about this particular issue because, again, I think we've said this before, and as you know, I do a lot of kind of work on this front. The most important role in democracy is citizen. It is ideas like that is very important. We get those in front of elected officials so we can have the debate. We can include some of those ideas in the discussion we're having, and hopefully begin to get on top of some of these challenges. So, Lisa, thanks for calling and thanks for thinking about this issue. Please make sure you convey your thoughts to your elected representatives.
Well, Chris Hand, attorney, government expert, thank you so much for joining us again this month. We really appreciate your insights.
I look forward to seeing you in June.
All right.